As a park ranger, I have seen a lot of odd things in my time. We get people that come out here for all sorts of reasons, especially in the camping area when it's off season. I've stumbled across all sorts of weird stuff, but so long as that weird stuff is legal and consensual, if you get my drift, then that's up to them. No judgment. Most of them can't even look you in the eye the next morning, and we just have a small chuckle about that. As I said, if you are consenting adults, it's your own business. But one time, I came across something that ended up being a police investigation. You see, I was out and about, performing one of the last evening patrols before heading home for the night. We had 3 tents booked in that night, and it was getting towards winter when the camping area would be closed. 2 couples had appeared, and 1 family with a mother, dad, and 2 small babies. The tents were fairly spaced out, and just before midnight, everything was quiet. I just finished up, heading back to the office to sign off, when I saw a young girl, probably no older than 18, run past me. She was just in her underwear, and from the quick flash I saw of her face before running off to the trees, she was terrified, all wide-eyed and mouth ready to scream. Immediately, I turned around, showing my flashlight in the direction she'd ran off to. There was nothing. I headed that way and looked all around, calling out even. Nothing. I recalled the 3 ladies that were booked into the campsite. They were all older. The mom was likely in her later 30s, and the 2 women in the couples were around their mid-20s, I would think. There was no good reason for a young girl to be running around in the dead of night when it was freezing cold. So, I went through protocol and alerted colleagues and police. They headed out and conducted a more thorough search, woke the campers who were not happy that the babies had been disturbed, but there was no trace. Literally no trace. I'm talking 0 footprints where I'd seen her. No apparent way in or out that showed any evidence somebody had even ran through here. And no reports of missing teen girls or bodies showing up. I was relieved, but at the same time, not exactly sure what I saw. It did leave the question of what the hell did I see, or did I possibly hallucinate it? I guess time will tell. A couple of years ago, I was sat, filing out some paperwork in the office, when a call comes in on the radio, telling me I think I'd better get down here ASAP. I just remember thinking that somehow they must have known I just sat down for a minute with a fresh pot of coffee. But a colleague calls through something like that. You better go check it out. I'm a ranger out in SoCal, and we have a massive expanse of parkland that we look after. So, after jumping in the truck and heading off to the area, one of the rangers had also been checking in on to see what we got. We have an official camping area out here, which is super busy and is ran and looked at and after by a separate team. We don't tend to get involved with that much, but we do, however, find the occasional off-site camper in the woods that we have to remove for their own safety. People, or idiots, don't seem to realize that there is a reason why there is a safe campsite, and although you can hike through designated areas, there is plenty of wildlife out there that would very much like you for an appetizer. So I pull up the truck to the spot my colleague is waiting, and my heart sinks when I see the tents. I was asked if I looked inside, and I can now see my colleague turning a little green. He told me I better take a look. I just remember thinking how bad it could possibly be. I mean, the tent, from the outside at least, hardly even looked disturbed. There were no apparent rips in the material, or obvious signs of any animal activity, let alone violent activity or struggle. But as soon as I opened the zipper, the smell hit me like a hammer to my face. Blood, and a lot of it. But that's it. No body, no belongings, not even a sleeping bag. Nothing. Just a tent full of blood. We had the police come, and they did their thing. Did a massive search of the area, and although how anything would have survived that much blood loss, I don't know. But where was the body? That site was a potential homicide location. There was also no blood trails outside of the tent, no footprints, tire marks, or anything, other than from us. Speculation was that the body was killed in that tent, and then drug off. But once again, there were no markings or indications in the soil or ground below us to show any of that. The cops let us know a while later that after doing tests, it was indeed human blood, but having no match whatsoever on the system to who it belonged to. So, that's another park ranger tale. We'll never know what the hell happened. I was working as a ranger this one time when I heard something pretty weird from one of the campers. It was low season, and we only had a few bookings. One, a group of Boy Scouts and their two leaders who were both middle-aged moms. Two, a very small church group, all female. And three, two college girls who had been doing some sort of nature photography shoot and research, it appeared. So, a lot of females aside from a small group of young Boy Scouts. There were around 5 of them, and I'd say they were all preteen. That's important to note for the story. You see, in the morning, while the scouts were cooking their breakfast, and the church ladies were doing their prayer circle, one of the college girls came storming over to the office, making and filing a complaint. She said that there had been a man outside their tent during the night. They knew it was a man, as he mumbled a couple of things and laughed. He'd had apparently a very deep voice. She said he was drunk, and that he had urinated on the side of the tent. Again, not only from the voice, but the height of where the urine had hit the tent. They known it was a guy, and not one of the little boys. Sure enough, I headed over to their tent at the location they said it happened. And sure enough, there was a strong smell of human urine. There were also 3 empty beer cans on the floor, and multiple cigarette butts. No one on that site claimed to have brought any alcohol with them, and none of them seemed like secret drinkers, and there had been no sight or smell of tobacco. Thing is, our campsite is miles away from anywhere. You would have to drive to get here, and there were no obvious signs of anybody else coming onto or through the site. It was enough to freak everybody out, and they all packed up and left. Can't say I blame them. We kept watch overnight for the next week or so, but never saw anything, and never had any more complaints. Maybe the girls just made the whole thing up. I don't know. It didn't feel like it though. And between the beer cans, cigarettes, and urine smell, it seems like a lot to waste your time on, and a lot of a story to build up. For what? Sometimes, some of the scariest things don't necessarily have to be a torn up body, or tons of blood. They just have to be unexplained. So, I work for the forestry department, and I often travel around conducting various bits of research. I've gotten to travel far and wide, often ending up in the most remote and often beautiful places that would be extremely unlikely to see your average Joe ever go to. Unless, like me, it was something to do with their job. Therefore, when you find something in one of these spots that has very obviously been left by a person, there is absolutely no rhyme or reason for it. you can't help but jump to nefarious conclusions. So, when you're out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, up in the ass end of Canada, with nothing around for miles, and you find a bed, it's kind of weird, if not downright unnerving. And I want to be clear, I don't mean like some leaves and twigs, something somebody had created as a bed for themselves. I mean an actual single wooden bed, complete with rotten, moldy mattresses. Multiple mattresses. Can you think of a singular reason why that would be there? There are no houses or any sort of building structures that used to be or are still there for miles and miles. In fact, the nearest road I believe is about 46 miles away, or in Canadian, 46 kilometers. There were no recent tracks except mine. Although from the state of it, it did seem like it had been there for a very long time. It seemed like a very unusual place, just to dump a bed you didn't want anymore. And also, why? Who would haul a bed all the way out here? I ended up alerting the cops, wondering if maybe it had been used for a crime and dumped out here, since it was unlikely anybody would ever find it. Or maybe this was some kind of gang kill location. It seemed rather implausible, and thankfully, I couldn't see any obvious stains on the bed or around it, but who knew? I've never heard back about it, so I guess it wasn't the missing puzzle piece in some nationwide serial killer hunt. But I still can't think of a single good reason why it would have been there. One of the scariest things that has ever happened to me occurred while I had to take a bunch of kids from the local church group camping. I was only around 18 at the time, and one of the youth leaders of the group, mainly because it was going to look good on my college manuscript. There was around 10 little kids, me and another youth leader, we'll call her Tammy, and then 2 adults, Mr. and Mrs. Love. That really was their name. They ran the Sunday school, and this was an overnight treat for the kids, who were all pretty young. I want to say around 8 to 11. We did all the usual camp stuff until it got to the evening. While roasting s'mores, one of the kids asked for a ghost story, but Mr. Love said he wasn't going to scare them. I guess the Bible is scary enough. But to make up for no spooky stuff, he would allow a quick game of manhunt in the dark, as long as they all stuck 2 in and around the tents and the first row of trees if he blew the whistle. They all came straight back, and whether they'd been found or not, Mr. and Mrs. Love and 2 of the kids would be seekers, and Tammy and I would hide along with the rest of the kids. I figured since I wasn't 10, I could bend the rules ever so slightly. I ran back a bit further into the trees. I planned to sneak out when I thought I was close to being the last to be found. Feeling pretty smug, as it was really dark back here, and there was no way I'd be found until I sprang out. It was super quiet, as all the kids were desperately trying not to give away their hiding spot. It became really obvious when I heard this sort of banging noise behind me as it amplified, all throughout the trees. I just remember thinking, I'm going to be given away by a raccoon or something, or a possum. There was some rustling, and then all of a sudden, I was blinded as the thing making the noise flipped on a light. I don't think I've ever been so terrified or screamed so loud in my life. There was a guy who stood behind me, only I couldn't see his face properly, like he had a stocking over it, kind of like how you see in the movies about bank robbers. As soon as I screamed and saw him, he ran. I just stood there screaming until Mr. Love suddenly appeared from the other side and grabbed hold of me, asking what had happened. Was I hurt? He took me back to camp at that point, as I could just speak. I was so scared. When we got there, and this had all taken just a few moments, everybody was back. I told them what I'd seen, and all the kids began crying. The adults knew me well enough to know there was no way I would make something like this up. So, Mrs. Love called the cops on her cell phone, while Mr. Love got everybody to huddle together and put all of our flashlights on. The police showed up and checked out the area. Of course, it was super hard to see anything in the dark, but they checked pretty thoroughly, and I even showed them the exact spot that I had seen the mysterious man. There was no trace of him or anybody else, and they ended up helping to drive all the kids home, as really nobody wanted to spend the night. The next morning, they went back again, just to check for any evidence in the daylight. Now, they were able to see a ton of weird carvings that had been very recently cut into the trees, and several bullets and other sharp objects found on the floor near to where I had apparently been standing. Had I possibly disturbed a would-be mass murderer? Those are one of the things that will haunt me forever, knowing that I could have been killed